By the way, whatever happened to the World War I flying ace?
Oh, he's probably getting ready to take off in his Sopwith Camel on the next dawn patrol.
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. On this episode, we're going to be talking about the Lancaster Stormers, formerly the Lancaster Barnstormers, who play in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Later on in this episode, I'll be speaking with Sky Dillon, who designed the just-released logo. And I'll be speaking with Baseballpalooza regular and Lancaster native Dave Hirte. And of course, Dan Simon will be back with one of his Studio Simon Stumpers. Right now, I am so pleased to be joined by Lauren Zuckerman, who is the Director of Marketing for the Lancaster Stormers, not the Barnstormers anymore, the Lancaster Stormers. For the second week in a row, this recording is happening before the launch of this brand. So we don't know what the public reception is going to be, but this is a major change for the Lancaster Barnstormers, changing their name, changing their branding. Lauren, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Yes, tomorrow is the big day that we're announcing everything, so excited to see how it goes.
At the time of this recording, we are about 25 hours away from the unveiling. Obviously, you know, the visual brand is changing, but in addition to that, the name is being shortened from Lancaster Barnstormers to Lancaster Stormers. What was the thinking in that name change?
So Stormers has kind of been the nickname that people have been using to shorten Barnstormers pretty much the whole time that the team has been around. We thought about, redoing the logo, and while redoing the logo, part of what we were doing was removing the barn. So changing the name and removing the barn kind of made sense to do it with the logo, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't completely changing the name or losing the identity of the team. So this was a great way to kind of modernize it without completely changing it.
I'll be speaking with Sky Dillon, who created the branding, later on in this episode. But looking at these new marks, it's clear that the team made a decision to be much more sort of forceful, much more sort of aggressive with the branding, rather than this very sort of peaceful scene with the barn and whatnot. So what was the team's thinking in choosing this much stronger visual presence?
So the team, it's our 20-year anniversary this year. So when you look at like the landscape of all the other teams in the Atlantic League and you look at their logos, the Long Island Ducks and us are the oldest, and you can really tell. So we kind of always had, the idea in the back of our mind that the barn, while it has to do with Lancaster and the agriculture and everything, it's not the fiercest, most menacing type of mark. It's, as our GM says, it is a kind of a bunch of dead wood. So we really wanted to change it, and we went through a lot of different iterations and ideas. Originally sticking with the barn and the agricultural theme, we were looking at different barn animals, different farmers, things like that. So keeping the idea of the barn was really important, but not necessarily the actual barn itself. And the team has won 4 championships, 2 back-to-back. So we are a very strong team, and we really wanted something that represents that, something that was, other teams should be scared of.
Well, that's an interesting point about this mark, is because, and obviously in the minor league baseball landscape, there's a lot of sort of cutesy, cartoony, character-based marks out there. This is not one of them, right? This bull crashing through the wood of the barn. The bull is not a cartoon character. It is a more literal approach to an aggressive, angry bull. Overall, for the team, what was the thinking in terms of an identity that was not part of the wacky, character-based, cartoony, kid-friendly marks, and was more sort of traditional sports, aggressive bull character?
So our mascot is Silo, which is he's a bovine-like creature, but he's a cuter version of that. So part of the idea was kind of what can we do that has to do with Silo and relates to him. We want to build off of that and kind of show the more menacing side as well.
So I grew up about an hour from where you all are in Lancaster. It's a place that I'm familiar with just because, I was from there. And then, my parents would take us on the weekend there to, see Amish country and that sort of thing. And so these storms that roll through there are real, right? Like one of the marks that Sky created here has a barn with like lightning behind it, and it's a very sort of imposing look of this barn in the middle of a storm, and it's a storm at night, which I think is important too, because like that's even scarier. It's a nighttime scene with lightning and whatnot. It really is an about face from my perception of this place. Is it is a very peaceful place. It's the rolling hills and it's the farms and it's the Amish markets and that sort of thing. So this very strong identity for a team, to me, it shows a different side of Lancaster, Pennsylvania than I think most people would associate with that. What was the team's thinking in that, like showing this like sort of scary, stormy side instead of the more like the peaceful side?
Yeah, well, I mean, most people think all of Lancaster is just kind of farmlands and Amish, but we went through a few different iterations of the storm. And once we decided that we were dropping the barn and it was going to be Stormers, we played around with different like tornado looking characters and different versions of storms, but we don't really get like tornadoes here. So we really wanted to keep a version of the storm, but also make it relevant to where we are. So I think, keeping the barn and keeping the storm, we use the lightning bolt a lot. We say a storm is coming, things like that. And while we have the peaceful, land here, which you can see when you're driving through, we still do get a bunch of different storms, and, the barns do break and things like that. So it was a great way to kind of show that we have the farmland, but also show that, there's other things that happen and tie in the name to the land also.
Yeah, there were just being from there and knowing what those summer thunderstorms can feel like, that logo that Sky created with the barn and the lightning behind it is really evocative. One of the things that I noticed, obviously, is that there are certain ties to the previous set of marks that
Mhm.
that carried over. The most prominent one, as I'm looking through the marks that Sky sent over, is the script L with the baseball in it. That is, serves as the cap logo that's been part of the suite for a long time. The color palette is the same. So there's obviously some very new, different, updated marks, and the name has changed. Why did the team decide to include some of the old marks in the current brand rather than doing just a complete refresh?
So we really liked the L, and we felt like that was a stronger identity of the brand than the barn. When we use the logo, a lot of the shirts and the hats and things have the L, and people really identify the L with the team. So we didn't feel like that was something that needed to be changed. We wanted to keep that. But it was really like the barn. We felt like that looked more outdated. So we wanted to change it and we wanted to update it, but we didn't want to completely, change the identity. We have a lot of loyal fans that have been here for 20 years, and the team is a big part of the community. It didn't feel like we needed a complete rebrand. We really wanted more of a refresh. Also, having everybody's merch and shirts and everything that they like to wear, we wanted to keep all of that still relevant too. We don't want to make a huge change. We don't want to change the name, change the logo. We're getting new turf
Oh,
this year. It's be a lot of changes. We wanted to keep some things.
do we know yet which logo is going to be on the ice cream helmets?
No, we don't know that yet, but we do have new sweatshirts and hats and shirts and everything with the new logo coming out.
So for people around the country who ask about your team, who comment on your team, without hearing us pronounce Lancaster the way we pronounce Lancaster, do you have to correct people who pronounce it Lancaster?
Yes, all the time. Even when we have, interns here from, like, they might go to college around here, but they're from New York or New Jersey. They never can pronounce it
Yeah.
correctly.
Yeah. It's Lancaster, not Lancaster.
Yes.
So, like I said, this interview is happening a day before the unveil. I'll be using quotes from this interview in my sportslogos.net article that's going up as you guys are making the unveiling tomorrow. So we don't know what the public reaction is yet, but I'll just ask you in terms of the marks, are there any details about the new logos that really stand out to you? Anything that you're really excited for the world to see?
Yeah, we have the lightning bolt in the top of the bowl. So when you're looking right at it, some people notice it and some people don't, which I think is really interesting. But there's a red lightning bolt that goes right across the top, and that was important to us to have that tie into the Stormers. So we have a version that's just the bullhead and a version that says Stormers on top. Even if you're just seeing the bull without the word Stormers, you can still associate it with the Lancaster Barnstormers, now Stormers, especially because we did look at a bunch of different bull logos that other teams have, Chicago
Mhm.
Bulls, and we wanted to make sure that it stood out from that. They both are red and black, but they're very different looking. So having something unique like that was important to us.
Yeah, the lightning bolt that goes down the middle between the bull's eyes there as he's staring at you, I think is a really fun detail. So, Lauren, thank you so much. Where can people find the Stormers? We can call them the Stormers now officially. Where can people find the Stormers online and find some of this great new merch?
It's lancasterstormers.com. You can find all the new merch, all the information for games and tickets, and all of our social links as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. I appreciate you facilitating access to the marks before they go live. It helps me write about these for sportslogos.net, and it's fun. Makes me feel like an insider talking to the teams before these logos get unveiled to the world.
Yeah, we're excited to finally share it with everyone. We've been kind of teasing it, and some people seem to have an idea but aren't totally sure. So we're excited to see how everybody reacts tomorrow.
That is, it's a lot of fun. I can't wait to see the reception to it tomorrow, and can't wait to get to a game and see which of these logos ended up on the Helmet Sundays.
Yeah, let us know when you're in town.
All right. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I am so pleased to welcome back to the podcast, friend of the podcast from Sky Design, Sky Dillon. How are you doing?
Doing great, Paul. It's always great to chat.
This is really fun to see the Lancaster Barnstormers rebranding as the Lancaster Stormers. This is about an hour from where I grew up, so I'm very well familiar with this part of the country, with this area, and so I really like talking about this brand in particular. But I want to get into some of the the work that went into creating this brand, some of your thought process. But let's start right from the outset here. Let's just start with where you all landed this very bull centric Stormers brand, not the Barnstormers anymore, but Stormers. What was the thinking that went into this identity, the final version where you landed on this bull centric version of this brand?
Yeah, so we always start with the big idea. What's our why? And for anyone familiar with the Atlantic League, the Lancaster Barnstormers are one of the more iconic teams in the league. They've had a pretty long history there since 2005. So their brand had been pretty well established and had really not made any changes to any of the marks over the years. And about, I want to say roughly 10 years ago, 2015 or so, it was their year to host the All-Star game. And so they reached out. And as part of our assignment to work on the All-Star branding for that upcoming season in 2016, the owners were also interested in potentially looking at maybe refreshing the marks, updating the brand. And so we did an initial foray into what some potential could exist there. And so we did a deep dive into Lancaster, into the brand, into thinking about what some storylines could be that really could help activate the brand in a more modern way without letting go of that rich heritage that they had. And so that was really the impetus of this entire project. So it was summer of 2015. We came to Lancaster, did some research, and and came up with a lot of big ideas, one of which we called Storming Forward. And it really paid tribute to this idea of Lancaster having this really rich agricultural history and backdrop. For those unfamiliar with the area, it's basically known as Amish country in a lot of ways. So rolling hills, fields, farms, just beautiful countryside, all now nestled within this very modern city of Lancaster, which has been revitalized in the last few decades or whatnot. So they have a lot of modern offerings to complement these very traditional agricultural roots, if you will. And so a lot of potential existed there to bring some of that new energy to the brand. And that year wasn't the right year. We still did the All-Star Game logo, but kind of pressed pause on perhaps injecting some new life into the brand itself. But fast forward to this past season, 2023, and at that point, ownership felt like it was the right time to finally, pull the trigger on that particular idea. And so the overall concept we had was called Storming Forward. And it was just this idea of how could we activate and bring some new fresh life and energy to the brand and kind of build on the legacy that was already there. And this idea of shortening the name to just Stormers gives you that kind of just activation potential, if you will, and then trying to find some kind of a character that could really, again, serve as the face of the brand. To that point, all that they had used was this very iconic script L and kind of that front facade of a barn with a flying baseball. So certainly a great mark, had served its purpose over the course of the history of the club, but now it was time to introduce a character that could really be activated in a lot of fun ways. So kind of, again, if we just look at the end of the process, we landed on the bull for a lot of great reasons, but it was certainly not our first choice initially. And it took the entire process to really, discover as a team that was the right solution.
Well, this process that you're talking about, I think, is really fun. And I want to talk about some of the other options that you discussed. In some of the design documents, some of the process documents that you provided to me, the first page has an interesting study. I was surprised to see the Eugene Emeralds pop up. You drew a line, an arrow from their original Emeralds brand, which has this peaceful scene of a river flowing through, this Oregon landscape, and then an arrow to the grandiose Sasquatch logo that now serves for the team's brand. And then underneath that, you have the Lancaster. We got to be careful about how we pronounce this too. Did they school you in that? The pronunciation of Lancaster. It is not Lancaster. It is Lancaster when you're in Pennsylvania. So the Lancaster Barnstormers original logo, like you described, very peaceful front face of a barn, and then an arrow pointing to an open, empty canvas, a blank canvas of possibilities. So that's the sort of transition that you were envisioning, I think, is something from peaceful and serene to something along the lines of what the Emeralds did with their Sasquatch logo. Let's talk about some of these other possibilities, because there are some fun ones, and then we'll talk about why the bull itself won out. There are several different versions with a rooster that is flying, but then also a metallic version of this rooster where it's part of a weather vane, which very much evokes that sense of the barn. And then some with horses, somewhere it's crashing through the barn, somewhere it's running away or into or with a storm. And then like a combine thresher, is that right? Like a thresher, a combine?
Exactly.
Okay. And then within the combine thresher, the mechanics of it, there are baseball bats rather than blades. And then, of course, different versions of this bull that we landed on. So, I mean, honestly, like 6 different distinct logos, directions this could have gone. What were the conversations around, going from rooster to combine thresher with, and then landing on bull?
Yeah. So again, as you referenced, that inspiration from the Emeralds was great. We actually showed the team 3 different degrees of brand evolution that they could pursue. So a very conservative direction was simply just adding a character similar to the Detroit Tigers when they added that tiger to their iconic D back in the day. A version that was, essentially just updating the brand as is and not introducing a character. And then the third was that idea of what the Emeralds did, was take something that's more of a landscape, which is very similar in nature to the existing Barnstormers brand, but injecting a whole new face into it with a character and really flipping the brand on its head, if you will. So a whole new look and feel. So part of that, with the strategy of storming forward being our hook, was this idea of really just thinking about the brand in terms of, it's no longer this serene farm setting, if you will, but at the end of the day, this is a baseball team. These are professional athletes. This is about generating excitement and in a lot of ways feeling, creating something strong and dynamic that brings excitement. And so this idea of just kind of merging this very traditional farm setting with a storm and letting that become kind of this amalgamation of a variety of ideas. So it was really, for that first round, you just listed a number of different farm animals and symbols. That was really the idea. It was like, let's just take a farm scene, take anybody who's on the premises of that farm at the time, and imagine them being swept up in some kind of a storm or creating some kind of a storm with baseball imagery, barn imagery. And so that's where you see, the natural starting point was this rooster flying off of the weather vane, as if the kind of the thought process here creatively was, what if this storm, the lightning struck that metal rooster that was at the top of the barn on the weather vane and brought it to life?
Mhm.
I'm not sure what the proper comic book reference is for characters there, but I feel like somebody was brought to life with a lightning bolt at some point or whatever. And so that really was, for a lot of those initial sketches, that was really where our head was at, was this weather vane rooster come to life, now kind of surging through surging through a barn with wooden planks breaking around it, as the face of this new Stormers brand. But we didn't stop there. As you saw, we tried basically everything under the sun. We did horses, we tried cows. They have a big dairy presence there in Lancaster, so we tried dairy cows. We looked at machinery. So the combine was very polarizing throughout the process amongst the team and the staff, but definitely provided some fun options there, really kind of bringing that machinery to life. Trying to think what else we tried. We looked at rams, we looked at sheep, this idea of thinking about animals that convey this sense of bold power, if you will. And so I grew up on a farm in central Maine, and we had sheep growing up, and you didn't want to mess around with the ram. If you looked the wrong way at the wrong time, you were going to get it. And so
Yeah.
Plenty of great authentic inspiration to draw from personally, thinking about these animals that could represent a storm. And so we looked at rams bursting through barn planks, and the bull was in there. It's funny, we really just had a couple of sketches initially with the bull, but we really thought it was going to be the rooster, just by that, that kind of the logic that stemmed from the fact that a barn's, roof is traditionally seen with a weather vane. They'd used an alternate mark with a rooster in the past. And so it just kind of seemed like the natural starting point. But that's the beauty of the creative process, is you never know what to expect around each turn, and the beauty of collaboration when you have a lot of really smart people in the room, unpacking an idea in a concept.
I'm really interested in the decision to take that Emeralds-esque step of serene landscape to, in their case, a mythological monster. In this case, a serene barn scene to aggressive animal. That decision of a place that is Amish country, right? It's associated with anti-violence in a way, right? Like, so this decision that the team would come to you with, of, we're going to have a more aggressive, a different feeling identity. How that relates to the actual place of Lancaster, Pennsylvania is interesting to me. Was that part of the conversation?
It definitely was. One of our, again, instinctively, when we started the process, the close to the vest option, if you will, was really just kind of doing this very whimsical character that felt right at home in Amish country, and in kind of that natural setting of Lancaster that it's really known for. But our job is always to show a range of ideas and to stretch the client and see them, show them possibilities that they didn't even realize existed. And then from that, we can always rein it in, but that, at least by stretching them with ideas that kind of run the gamut, if you will, now we're able to really identify what that right path is. And it's not that they didn't like any of the other ideas,
Mhm.
but once they saw this more aggressive option, it's like, ooh, there's something there. And I think there's, I don't, again, 2005, I believe, was the first year of the team. So it's been roughly, just about 20 years now of that
Mhm.
very, that particular identity that they've used. So it's almost like there was an appetite to just create something fresh that felt like it was going to make a splash in a way. And again, they're there to compete. They're there to win. It's a baseball team. So I think just instinctively from an athletic perspective, there's a desire to kind of push the envelope a little bit to that more aggressive place, if you will.
Mhm.
But so I think that kind of, again, the beauty of the process, showing a variety of ideas at the beginning, and again, trusting the instinct of the club. No one knows the brand better than the club itself. And again, that's where our job is, really to facilitate the process, show some great ideas and some options, but ultimately it's their instinct that wins out. And that was their call, and I think it was a great one.
The last time you were on, we were talking about the Hagerstown flying boxcars, and there were actual baseballs sort of peppered throughout that brand, and that was fun to talk about. This brand, the Lancaster L script L carries over, and there's a baseball in that. But other than that, the presence of baseballs is pretty limited in this brand. So it makes the brand much more about the place than it does about the sport or necessarily the team. Was that an intentional part of this process?
Not really. It's just kind of where we netted out. Again, if we
Okay.
look at our first round of sketches, we had, baseballs flying through these storm clouds. We had baseballs being impaled by pitchforks, and baseball bat handled pitchforks being struck by lightning, being planted into hay bales, things like that. Like you mentioned, baseball bats as the blades on the combine. So we looked at, baseball imagery. It just,
Mhm.
as the process unfolded, this is where we netted out. As you mentioned, that script L is really the most iconic part of the brand. So it made sense to hold on to that as a kind of a legacy piece that could be a bridge to this new era. So that remains unchanged. The colors remain unchanged, again, as a connection to the equity that was established for those nearly 20 years already. The one piece of baseball imagery that is there is in that roundel that you mentioned, with that very domineering view of looking up at the barn facade, lightning striking the weather vane, storm clouds rolling in the background, all set within that dynamic view of the batter's box and home plate. So baseball imagery in a little bit of an unorthodox way that, again, it's a little bit unexpected, but that's what makes it fun.
The last question I'll ask you about here, Sky, is the name itself. Obviously, you incorporated literal storms into the brand, and the nickname Stormers is a shortened version of Barnstormers, which is a completely different use of the word storm, obviously. And so there's a double entendre going on here, because you've still incorporated barn imagery, and like you said, the process involved barn animals, farm animals. So there's this balance of a literal storm and still using the barn imagery itself to sort of tie to where that name came from. Was that, and I know every time I ask you this question, you say we're open to a challenge, but what was that a challenge for you to walk the line between a literal storm and then the barnstorming imagery?
It was a challenge in the sense of just knowing what had been the brand for so long, very endearing amongst the community, that particular view of the barn, and really the persona of the brand had been established. So that, I think, was the most interesting piece to unpack during the process, was, again, kind of stretching ownership to see, like, there's a lot of potential here if we can take that same theme of a farm setting, but just push it to a place that feels more bold and aggressive. And so that's where, again, looking at ways that we could not only introduce a character that represented this very strong and aggressive presence, the bull, again, where we landed. Now looking back, it's like, why didn't we think of that right off the bat? That a bull in a china shop, this idea of being bold and aggressive. If you're storming, on a farm setting, a bull busting through wooden planks is the more logical character now, looking back, more so than a rooster would be, perhaps, just knowing that the attitude that they eventually wanted to convey. But to your point, I think it was all about taking that farm imagery, but thinking about, injecting it with that energy. So that's where the idea of bursting barn planks, or that very that more dynamic looming view of the barn facade with the storm clouds in the background. It was just an opportunity to stretch ourselves. Even the typography. Initially, our inspiration was Pennsylvania Dutch typography, that calligraphy style that's very iconic to the region. And as you can see where we landed, it's almost as if that was injected with that same, kind of aggressive attitude and style that the rest of the brand embodies now. So it's kind of this merger between, there's hints of Pennsylvania Dutch calligraphy with kind of a bold, aggressive, angular, athletic block font that all kind of comes together in a really strong way. So I guess all that to say is as the process unfolds, it's all about kind of just following your instinct along the way, and letting the instinct of the club really help guide that process. And we really kind of had this moment about a month or two in. We've been exploring a lot of different characters. We thought it was going to be the rooster. We even looked at farmers, actual characters that were humans, as like angry farmers that were storming around, and kind of pressed pause for a little bit. And the team came back and said, what about a bull? And they picked out one sketch from that first round. We just had one sketch in there, and they just said, there's something about that feels like it's the answer, but we've been so hot on this rooster that we haven't had a chance to really flesh it out yet. And as soon as we brought it into digital color, it was like, boom, lightning bolt across the forehead, that look in its eyes. It's like, that's us, that's our brand. So that's the magic of the process, really.
I lied to you, because I actually was going to ask you about the type, and so I'm glad you got there on your own. But I wanted to ask you about that type because I really like it, and I really like, in particular, the one mark that is it's essentially a word mark, but there is some imagery in it, which includes the barn. While it's not stormy and there's nothing about it that it's a front facing image of this barn, the fact that the barn doors are open creates this like potential kinetic energy in a way, right? This like what's coming out of that barn with those barn doors open like that. That's a really important detail of that mark, I think. The fact that those doors are open above the word Stormers there. What was the thinking that went into that mark in particular? And so far as I can tell, that's the only place that barn appears like that with the doors open.
Again, just thinking about it in terms of an evolution, thinking in terms of our overall goal was to activate and give it activation potential. And so just introducing any kind of energy or motion where we could. Again, thinking in terms of Stormers being the moniker, this idea of a storm rushing through the barn, that idea of blowing the doors open, it just kind of all falls in line with that same train of thought. So obviously, anytime you're creating an identity, you want it to feel cohesive throughout the system. So it just wouldn't have felt right if those barn doors were closed and very proper, when the rest of the marks in the brand are certainly have more energy and that idea of the storm cloud rushing through.
This is really fun for me, and in particular to talk about a brand that is literally, as we're talking about it, I'm seeing many of these for the first time. And so that's an interesting exploration of this for me. And I really appreciate you, first of all, facilitating the sharing of these. As I mentioned, we're talking about this now before they are unveiled. And so obviously everyone who is listening to this will be listening after the unveil has happened. So I look forward to seeing what that response is. But it's a terrific new look for a team that is from an area that I know, and so it's really fun for me to talk about this. So Sky, thank you for A, facilitating this conversation, and B, the awesome work that you did on this brand. This is really fun to talk about.
Of course, Paul. Yeah, really excited for the launch and really excited for the club. It's like I said, almost 10 years in the making now, so full circle in a lot of ways.
That is quite the origin story. By the way, speaking of origin stories, I think it was Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster who was brought to life by a lightning strike. So that we'll call that the Frankenstein rooster.
I love it.
I'm sure there are other superheroes out there who involve lightning in some way. So, Sky, this has been fun. Thank you so much. We will talk to you again. In the meantime, where can people find you, and what is your website, at least for right now?
So the URL is sdsbranding.com. And we're also on Twitter at Sky_Dylan.
Thank you, Sky. Really appreciate it.
You got it, Paul. Thanks.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I am so pleased to welcome back to the podcast for the second time, Baseballpalooza attendee and Lancaster native Dave Hirte. Dave, how you doing?
Hey, Paul, how's it going?
It is going so well. We're here on the Baseball by Design podcast. Last time you and I talked, it was in one of the ballparks on Baseballpalooza 2023. So here we are on Zoom, which is less fun, but still fun to be talking about your native Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Now, I should start off by saying that we are going to be in the greater Philadelphia area for Baseballpalooza 2024. We're going to be skirting around Lancaster. We're not going to be going to Lancaster because one of the prerequisites for Baseballpalooza is that we go to affiliated teams. I have nothing against the independent teams, the collegiate summer level teams, but that standard was established long ago that we go to the affiliated minor league teams rather than to the independent or the collegiate summer level teams. However, you tried, you floated, let's go see my native Lancaster, then Barnstormers. And you know, you got shot down in favor of some of the affiliated teams in the area.
I did get shot down.
What would we have experienced in Lancaster, Pennsylvania? The guys rolling up in our white van to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, what would we have experienced?
So Lancaster is home to one of the largest and oldest Amish sects in the entire country. So very likelihood of seeing Amish horses and buggies. I think there's 20 or 30,000 Amish still living in the greater Lancaster area. Occasionally you will see them riding on the roads, and that's definitely one of the things that Lancaster is known for.
Being there with Baseballpalooza, you know, we're always looking for casinos. We look for miniature golf. We look for brew pubs. This is an area where you grew up outside the context of the fact that there is, a large Amish sect there. Are there establishments that you would have recommended we hit?
Yeah, so Lancaster is not known for casinos, so it would have been a trip to Atlantic City for probably the closest casino.
Yeah, probably on the way to the Jersey Shore Blue Claws, I think, maybe, rather than
probably.
A Stormers game. Yep.
Yeah, Village Greens was a really great miniature golf place. Went out there, middle school, high school, hanging out with friends Friday night. Waterfalls, rock outcroppings, relatively natural. This was not your windmill and pirate ship type establishment. So I would have had you covered on miniature golf course for this trip.
You would have had us covered, Dave. You would have had us covered.
Us, yes.
Growing up there or being there, did you go to minor league baseball? Have you been to a Barnstormers game?
No, the Barnstormers came into town well after I left for college. So I left college 91. Barnstormers did not come into the Lancaster area until 2005. So I have never been to a Barnstormers game, have not even seen the stadium.
We may have to just like tack on an addendum to Baseballpalooza. We have a prequel this year. We're going to do a Phillies game and Atlantic City. We also don't do major league games. We do affiliated minor league baseball with two exceptions. We've been to a Chicago Dogs game. The Chicago Dogs are independent. We went to a Chicago Cubs game. That's the only major league game that we've ever been to. And then we went to see the Kansas City Monarchs, another independent team. So we have been to a couple of independent teams. We've been to one major league game. This year, we're going to have a little prequel. We're going to have a Phillies and Atlantic City prequel. We may have to tack on an addendum so that you can go see the now Stormers. So Stormers is short for barnstorming. Growing up in Lancaster, did you see like the barnstorming air shows that they did?
No, I never saw barnstorming in Lancaster. I'm not sure it was a real Lancaster type thing, other than like back in the 1800s and stuff like that, where the baseball teams would travel around. But Lancaster is also very agricultural. And so lots of barns around in the area. And for you folks that are real not familiar with Amish and Amish customs, one of the amazing things they do is if there's a barn that needs to be built or replaced, They will call all their friends over, and they will actually raise a barn in pretty much the span of an entire day. So it's a real community event, and they bring over all the Amish folks, and they will build and construct a barn in an entire day. So I'm sure that that has something to do with the original Barnstormer name, in addition to traveling baseball teams and the typical Barnstorm name.
That does raise the point, though, that Barn Raisers would have been an amazing name for a minor league baseball team. The Lancaster Barn Raisers? Come on, that would have been great.
Does not roll off the tongue real easy, but you're right. I think that would have been a good one.
The Barn Raisers. And then they could call them the Razors. Razors. Their logo could have been an actual razor. Dave.
An actual razor.
We're on to something here. The Barn Raisers, they would have been Razors for short. All right. Who do we call about this? Now we got to record a whole new episode.
You missed your calling.
Oh, man. Well, Dave, Lancaster native, as soon as I knew that I was going to be doing an episode on the Lancaster now Stormers, I knew that we had to get Lancaster's own Baseballpalooza participant Dave Hirte on to talk about his native town. And at the time of this recording, Dave, we are under 6 months to Baseballpalooza, so that the countdown is officially on.
Yeah, we have reached the top of the hill. We're more than halfway.
Holy smokes, amazing. Well, Dave, thanks so much for hopping on Baseball by Design. And hey, we'll see you in less than 6 months.
All right. Thanks for the invite, Paul. I enjoyed it.
All right, everyone, welcome back. It is time once again for your favorite, my favorite segment on the Baseball by Design podcast, Studio Simon Stumpers, with designer extraordinaire Dan Simon. Dan, good morning. How are you?
Who wants to know?
It's the world wants to know, Dan. Our listenership is dying to know how you are doing this morning. Is it fantastic or super fantastic?
It's fantastic.
Fantastic.
It's snowing where you are, and it's gray where I am, with rain supposed to be starting at noon. So for it to be super fantastic, the sun needs to be shining. So just fantastic today.
This snow started in the middle of my run, by the way. Well, maybe not the middle. I was at mile 5 of about a 6.5 mile run, and the snow started coming down. And so it was a wintry, slippery mix out there.
Well, next time, it sounds like tomorrow's run will be with snowshoes. So good luck with that.
Could be. Dare I say it is storming here, Dan?
There you go again with the segue. Paul Segue Computer. Nicely done. So, so we're obviously talking about the Lancaster Stormers, who...
Dan, this is Lancaster, Pennsylvania, not Lancaster, California. Lancaster.
Oh, my bad. I developed the identity for the Lancaster, California Jethawks. Actually, yeah. I did 3 brand identities for them. So that's the only way I know how to pronounce Lancaster. But I guess this is like the difference between bisons and bisons, Lancaster and Lancaster. Okay, Lancaster. So Lancaster Stormers. I sit corrected. So, of course, their name was Barnstormers. Now, that's a term. I don't know if everyone knows this. I would imagine a lot of people do. But for those who don't, the term Barnstormers comes from around the 1920s, when entertainment was not as easy to access as it is today with the technology that we have. And one of the things that people liked to do was see airplanes, which were still a relatively new thing in 1920, do stunts and things like that. And following World War I, when World War I ended, all of those biplanes that were being used to fight World War I were no longer needed. So the Army, or I don't think there was an actual Air Force then, it would have been like the Army Air Corps or something. They sold many of their planes at a much more reasonable price than buying a new plane would have cost. And former Air Force, I'm going to call it the Air Force just because I don't know for certain what it was called back then, former Air Force pilots and regular private citizens would buy up these planes, and a number of them would go barnstorming around the country, putting on air shows where they were doing tricks and stunts and things like that. And the reason it was called barnstorming is because back then there were not a lot of paved airport runways, and they would land in fields, oftentimes on farms that had large fields and also had barns, and they would park near the barn. As a matter of fact, my office is located at an airport that used to be exactly that. This was a large field, a pasture that was used to plant things, and it had structures on it like barns. So I'm sure there was barnstorming that went on right here where I'm sitting. Also in the 1920s, Major League Baseball players would barnstorm, going from city to city in the off season and putting on exhibition baseball games, and they took that term from the aviation barnstormers. So that's where the name comes upon.
One of my very favorite shirts, my very favorite and most comfortable shirts, is a barnstorming t-shirt from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, and it has a picture of a bus and it says barnstorming underneath it. And so I was familiar with that term. Well, A, because I didn't grow up too far from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and B, because I actually have a shirt that has the word barnstorming on it from not the baseball team in Pennsylvania, but from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Well, it's a great word that's associated with baseball. As a matter of fact, when I was putting together my sports design portfolio many years ago, I did self-initiated brand identities, and the very first one I did was for a team called the Akron Barnstormers. So the very first one I did, I used the term barnstorming. So I mentioned that major league players would go on barnstorming tours, and included in those major league players were Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, who went on barnstorming tours together at least during a couple of, if not more than a couple of, off seasons in the 1920s. And in following the 1927 season, that's the Murderers Row New York Yankees, one of the greatest teams of all time. Following the 1927 season, they went on a 3-week tour with 21 stops across the United States, began in Providence, Rhode Island, and ended up in Los Angeles, California. And on that tour, Ruth and Gehrig played on opposite teams, but they were the only major leaguers there. So the rest of the two lineups were filled out by local players. Now, Lou Gehrig's teams were named the Larrapin Loups. Larrapin, to larrup in American English, means to beat or thrash. In English, it is to flog soundly. I like the English definition better. So that's why they were called the Larrapin Loups. So with all of that, our Studio Simon Stumper today asks, what was the name of Babe Ruth's teams on this tour? Was it A, the Bustin' Babes, B, the Swattin' Sultans, or C, the Gorgeous Georges?
Bustin' Babes sounds like a nightclub. The Swattin' Sultans, I don't think it's the Swattin' Sultans. Gorgeous Georges to me sounds like, and so again, this is one where I don't know the answer, so I'm just trying to sort of get a feel for these names here. I don't think it's Bustin' Babes, because there's too many double entendres there for that to have been appropriate in the 20s. The Swattin' Sultans feels a little too tortured to actually, it doesn't really roll off the tongue. Gorgeous Georges, I don't know, sounds like something that they would have done in that era. So I'm going to go Gorgeous Georges.
I find your reasoning there to be interesting, because when I was putting together the two wrong answers to go with the one right answer, the Gorgeous Georges was the one I thought you would eliminate immediately. Now, I'm sure most of you know that Babe Ruth's birth name was not Babe, but rather his name is George Herman Ruth. So that's where the Gorgeous Georges came from. But nope, that's not the right answer.
Not it, huh? Okay.
And I was thinking, first of all, I was thinking you would know you might know this one right away, because I actually have seen photos of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig together from this tour for years and years and years. It's not even a new thing. This is not something I even had to research. This is, I saw this when I was a little, pictures of them on this tour when I was a little kid. So I thought maybe that's been out there in baseball publications and social media accounts. I know I've seen it on social media in like historical baseball accounts that I follow. So I thought you would just know it right away. But then I was thinking, if you didn't, you might go with the Swanton Sultans, because he was the Sultan of Swat, another one of his nicknames. So I thought, and you know, the Larrapin Lou's, Swanton Sultans seemed to go well with that. But the one that you eliminated right away was actually what they were called. They were called the Bustin' Babes. Speaking of Babe Ruth's real name being George, there's another Hall of Famer who's we associate with the name that he went by, which was not his first name. Tom Seaver was also a George. His given name is George Thomas Seaver. And speaking of given names, one more that I find very interesting. There was a player in the early 70s through the early 80s named Gene Tennis, not spelled like the sport, but spelled like the word 10 and the word ace, tennis. He was a pretty good player. He was the MVP of the 1972 World Series for the Oakland A's, where he hit .348 with 4 home runs and 9 RBIs. He also signed one of the first big free agent contracts back in 1976. It was a 6-year, $1.6 million contract with the San Diego Padres. I should note that was not $1.6 million a year. That was 6 years for a total of $1.6 million. Well, that's what contracts went for almost 50 years ago. But Gene Tennis's given name was Fury Gene Tennis. Fury like furious, Fury. Who names he was born, I believe, in 1946. Who in 1946 was naming their child Fury? Have you ever even heard of that as a first name?
Not as a first name. I've only heard of Nick Fury from the Marvel movies. And then my friend Song has a cat who is an all-black cat with one eye who we call Nick Furry. But Fury as a first name, I have not heard.
Well, there you have it. As we've said before, the things you learn on Baseball by Design.
I'm going to put that little NBC stinger in there. Dan, thank you so much. This is, first of all, thank you for the backstory on barnstorming as a term, because that's obviously important to this episode. This has been another fun one for the second week in a row. Most of this recording has happened before the brand was unveiled. Now it's out there. And so this is 2 weeks in a row that we've gotten sort of advanced looks at brands that I got to cover for sportslogos.net. Thank you for filling in that backstory. And go find Dan on Instagram at @studio_Simon. You've been posting more frequently. You got a huge reaction to your Lexington Legends brand that we covered last week. So it's fun to see you posting out there on social media, and people calling you things like King and the best, and, you know, old friends contacting you. It's fun to watch that. So go find Dan on Instagram. And Dan, we will see you next week.
Can't wait.